As we're giving people a chance to connect to Zoom. If you want to drop in the chat where you're calling in from, we always love to see where our Telos network is. We'll get started in just a minute, but want to make sure everyone has a chance to connect their audio and their video if they'd like. Okay, I'll get started so that if people are still joining us, they won't miss the meat of the conversation. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah, and I'm a member of the Telos staff team calling to you from Vermont today. Thanks so much for joining us for this discussion on the film Aswat Acherim, Other Voices. Welcome back to those of you who joined us for our live screening last night, and we're glad those of you who watched it on your own were able to join us for the discussion today. For those of you who are at a Telos event for the first time, the Telos Group is an American nonprofit based in DC, and our mission is to form communities of peacemakers across lines of difference and equip them to help reconcile seemingly intractable conflict at home and abroad. Our discussion today centers exactly on these themes, and we've got the great good fortune to be joined by three guests who know the film very well and who are here to share more about their stories and answer our questions about the film. Ose Oyamendan is the writer and director of Aswat Acherim, a Nigerian-American filmmaker based between Lagos, LA, and London. He's won awards from several festivals, including the Tribeca Film Festival, and holds an MFA in film production from the School of Cinematic Arts at the UCLA, Los Angeles. Roni Kaidar is an Israeli peace activist from Nativ HaAsara, and as a peacemaker, she meets frequently with groups to share her story, both within her home and as a speaker at major events. She's also a longtime Telos friend, and I hope that several of you on the call have had the opportunity to meet her on a trip, and if you haven't yet, that you will get to someday. Ahmed Al-Nassan is a Palestinian peace activist from Gaza City. He's organized many events in Gaza to promote peace and also advocates for the rejection of extremism on social media. For our conversation today, I'll begin by asking our guests several questions, and then we'll open it up to all of you. If you have a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat, and I'll invite you to unmute yourself and ask it directly. We're also joined by my colleague, Jack Saba, who will help translate as needed, as my Arabic is not up to scratch. So welcome, Ose, Roni, and Ahmed. I'd like to start our conversation around why we chose to tell this story about peacemaking. For Ose, why was this a story that you were drawn to? For Roni, during the film, you talk about several key Telos principles, such as mutual flourishing and being pro-Israeli, pro-Palestinian, pro-peace. Can you talk about why these are powerful and fundamentally important for you? And for Ahmed, what does it mean for you to be a peace activist in Gaza, and what challenges do you face doing this work? Feel free to start, whoever would like to.
Thanks everybody for joining us. I think Ronnie should start because I'm just the messenger here. So it should be Ronnie Hamed and I will talk a bit. And I didn't go to the other awful school across town. I went to USC, not the other one.
My apologies.
No, it's okay.
So Roni, then, for you, why is mutual flourishing and a pro-pro-pro approach to peacemaking so important?
Living so close to Gaza and learning a lot about the history and the story of the Palestinians besides our history, I feel that first of all, justice is the prime word in anything before we can go further anyway. And justice can only be made if we think pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, pro-peace, pro-justice. I'll add the pro-justice to it because I think it's pro-peace and pro-justice is one of the same. I can't see my life being normal and quiet and being less frightful then unless I see the Palestinian side and promote their story as well.
Thank you, Roni. Ahmed, as a peace activist from Gaza, does what Roni say resonates? And how do you approach your peace activism in Gaza? What challenges do you face?
Hello.
فهمت السؤال. أحمد كيف الحال؟
يا هلا يسعدك.
هلا فاهم السؤال ولا أترجم لك؟
على ما أعتقد إيش بيعني لك يعني إيش بيعني السلام لك أو كيف نظرتك للسلام بتكون؟
كمان ليش أنت بتشوف مهم إنه أنت تكون ناشط لأجل السلام ناشط؟ ليش مهم لك هذا الشغل؟
أحكي بالعربي مش مشكل؟
عادي كيف ما بريحك وأنا بترجم.
تمام. أولا مرحبا فيكم جميعا، وأنا سعيد إن طبعا انضميت لكم، وبشكر الجروب القائم على النشاط هذا. في البداية السلام طبعا إيش بيعني لي أنا؟ السلام بيعني لي سلام داخلي، بيعني لي إنه العدالة، الحرية، إني أعيش حياة منيحة، إنه أقدر أتنقل وأروح كيف بدي. في النهاية إنه ما يكونش في عنصرية، ما يكونش في ظلم، حرية رأي. كل هذه الشغلات إيش بتعني للسلام؟ ليش توجهت للسلام؟ أنا شاب انولدت يعني
So first of all, Ahmed is greeting everyone and saying that he's really happy to be participating in this call, this group. So he says, thank you for having me. And then he said he's going to go on to explain what peace is, what peace means for him. And all the things that make for peace are the presence of justice, an ability to be able to move freely, an ability to be able to speak freely about different ideas, lack of oppression, and an inner peace as well as an outer peace. تفضل يا أحمد.
أنا شخص يعني عمري 36 سنة. عشت في انولدت في ظل الانتفاضة الأولى، ومرت علي في الانتفاضة الثانية. عشت 3 حروب في غزة، شفت الموت أكثر من مرة. فبالتالي فكرت مع نفسي يعني الحل لهيك موضوع، يعني إحنا ليش حياتنا معرضة في كل لحظة للخطر؟ ليش أنا معرض إن أفقد روحي؟ ليش معرض إن أفقد أبويا، أمي، ابني، زوجتي، بنتي؟ لهيك فكرت في أكثر من مرة يعني إيش الطريق، فوجدت إنه فيش طريق قدامي إلا طريق السلام. يعني هو الطريق الوحيد اللي ممكن إنه إحنا نوصل لحياة إن الواحد يقدر يعيش فيها، بدل الحياة اللي هو يعني زي الكابوس.
So Ahmed says, you know, he's 36 years old today. And throughout his life, he's seen many periods of violence through the first intifada, the second intifada that he's lived through, 3 wars in Gaza. And so more than once he's seen death before his eyes, as he describes it. And so just all this violence and kind of misery that surrounds this life, he oftentimes would question, you know, why does fighting for peace look like, you know, seeing a loved one get killed or seeing himself get killed? And so he would often think about that point, that, you know, if we're working towards peace, why do I have to lose my family members or myself? And so he finally came to the answer that no, fighting for peace means that I have to exist, I have to stay here. And so there has to be another way, a peaceful method towards fighting injustice and working towards peace.
لهيك بلشت يعني أدور على الإنترنت إيش الطرق اللي ممكن الواحد يعمل فيها، كيف أتواصل مع ناس تدعمني بالاتجاه هذا، لأنه الوضع في غزة صعب إنك تحكي بالمنطلق إنه أنت بتحتاج السلام في ظل المعارك اللي بتدور وتفكير الناس والكراهية اللي تربط عليها الطرفين، كان الجانب الفلسطيني والجانب الإسرائيلي. فصعب، فوجدت انه طريق لازم الواحد انه نبني جيل، نعلم اولادنا ايش معنى السلام، نفهم الناس ايش يعني كيف الحياه راح تكون بسلام يعني. فبلشت انه اشتغل من خلال زي ورش عمل صغيره في غزه. طبعا تعرضت لمضايقات كثيره في وقتها، ولكن الحمد لله مشيت الامور، وتعرفت على روني، على إيريك، على اكثر من شخص داخل اسرائيل. وكانت طبعا النتيجه انه تعرضت للاعتقال اكثر من مره، ولكن الحمد لله مشيت الامور والان اليوم انا بامن بالسلام وبقاتل من اجل السلام حتى لو ايش ما صار معي يعني. فان شاء الله بنوصل للسلام ان شاء الله.
ماشي، فهلا بتكتب هاي الفقرة بعدين نرجع للسيرة تاخذ كمان أسئلة. And so Ahmed explains also his journey towards peacemaking and his activism. Basically, this instance, when he figured out that this is the way forward, he took to the internet and started searching for partners, for peace people to support him in this endeavor, and eventually found people like Eric, people like Roni Kedar, and started also hosting workshops in Gaza, because he's unfortunately, as he says, is in the minority. There's been generations that have been brought up on hatred towards the other on both sides. And so this is outside the mainstream, this work. And he's been arrested a number of times, questioned a number of times for his activism and his conversations with Israelis. But through this, he's made it. He's come out, and he's still convinced more than ever that this is the way forward. This is the way to see a peaceful future for himself and for generations to come. And so with that, we'll turn it back to you, Sarah.
Shukran, Ahmed. Thank you very much for your thoughts. I'd like to continue picking up on this question of peace and peace building. We've got two great peace activists here and a storyteller who's decided to tell a story about a peaceful resistance movement. But throughout the film, there's a tension between negative and positive peace. And what I mean by that is that negative peace is when there's a cessation of missile fire back and forth. But positive peace would mean transforming unjust realities on the ground. And as Roni talks about in the film, ending the blockade of Gaza. So Roni, in the film, you discuss the importance of ending the blockade on Gaza. And I'd love to hear how you talk about this aspect of peacemaking with your Israeli community members and even your family. What does it mean to be a peacemaker who advocates for a just reality in Gaza alongside the ending of missile fire back and forth?
It's definitely not easy, because fear does turn to take over us. I mean, at times I also feel that I'm so surrounded by fear. I'm so almost drowning in fear that I may forget, how, where to go, what to do, and what to say. But on the other hand, it makes me feel even more strongly that I have to do something, because I want to stop this constant fear. And I feel that as long as we are cut away from one another, as long as we don't see one another, if you think of it, you can see I know that 50% of the population in Gaza is under the age of 18. Which means that there are people, the youngsters growing up there, 50% of the population doesn't know what an Israeli really looks like, has never spoken to an Israeli, and vice versa. So it's very easy, especially under this fear and under this threat, constant threat on both sides, to see the worst in the people on either side. So I felt that I've got to know more people. I've got to see more people. And luckily today, they are the means and the ways, the technology, social media, even just a telephone, to pick up a phone and say, how are you? Suddenly there's a contact, and I look for these people who want the contact. So many people here will tell me, oh, it's minute, there's so few people who really want to see one another, to really look forward. Most of them don't want to know, which is true for both sides. Because when you start understanding too much, you feel more vulnerable. I feel it strengthens me. And I feel that the more people I know, and that's why I love it when I can help them reach out to a wider circle of people and be like Ahmed or Maha or whoever I meet on the way, or Rami. This is my way of showing my friends and family who these people really are. And just like having to look for a villain and trying to target the villain, it's so much more important to look for the people we can commute with, the people we can talk to, and find a solution for both of us, because we all deserve a life worth living here. And this realization, and people, when they speak to me, even on the village, within my family, they they see how determined I am. They see how I really, really, truly believe in what I'm saying. I'm not giving out slogans. I'm this is what I believe in, and that's why I won't stop. And then I'll introduce more and more people on either side in different ways, like the different groups, like the dance group and the drama group, and just schools that correspond with schools in Gaza. And suddenly it opens their eyes. And I think this is the only way I can take, and they do eventually realize. And just a quick example of one of my granddaughters who at one time when there were missiles and she was frightened and crying out loud and just didn't know what to do with herself. And her mother came and tried to calm her down. And after she managed to feel a bit better, she suddenly said, maybe the leadership should start listening to Grandma. So somehow what I say does sort of sink in, and that's encouragement. And I hear that in young groups that I meet here from different schools. So that's my way.
Thank you, Roni. It's clear that relationship building is so important for you and your work and is a really powerful tool of peacemaking. Ose, if we think about filmmaking as an aspect of storytelling that helps bring people closer together who are physically divided, I'd love to hear you speak more about who you hope the audience of this film is and how you approach it as a tool of peacemaking for people who aren't able to engage with the Ronis and Ahmeds of the world, but who are able to think more critically about what peace looks like through the medium of your film.
Thank you so much, Sarah. To be very honest, when I started doing it, I wasn't thinking about peace, actually. I was just thinking about the impossibility of relationships, but the more you get into it, the more you find out how unusual, how abnormal the way people have to live at that border is. Because when you look at Gaza and the area surrounds terror, from the last person in Gaza's terror around Erez and the next person in Gaza, there's just one city block that separates them. And that city block is just security. Without security, there will be no separation, and then when you see the lives that people live there, when I started, really, I knew all these young people, some of Ronnie's grandkids that some I'll play soccer with, and Eric's kids, and some kids in Gaza. And then they started growing up, and people are battling with life and death decisions, because in other parts of the world, we worry about life and life. But death is just like every day. You wake up in the morning, you don't know what you're going to run into. And I always thought that one of the strangest things that I've ever had or been part of in my life was my first day in Israel. And when I was going to sleep, the manager in the kibbutz, Niram, came to me and said, welcome. And if at night you hear boom, boom, he's talking about boom, you hear boom, boom, don't come out, stay here. It's said, and that was very surreal for me because I've traveled all over the world as a journalist and filmmaker. And what the hotel people say to you is like, welcome, have a nice stay. Nobody ever tells you to expect bombs, And then you go into Gaza and there's just no warning there. When it happens, it drops, And these are people, they're children, they're like it's just a very abnormal life. And I just felt like if from my background, I have nothing to do with this place, with this story, with this life. If it took somebody like me to tell it, it means it had become not too serious for so many people that should have done it. It's become like, something that happens, and it shouldn't be something that happens. It's something that needs to change. And for me, that was my biggest motivation, because I just felt that the more people know about this, the more hope it gives people on both sides that they also can do this. Because when I started, there were barely anybody talk. There were not too many people talking to people. Now there are more. It's like that community is growing. And I also felt like what obtains in Gaza and the southern Negev, to some extent, happens in other parts of the world. And the worst thing that happens in a crisis is when the people cannot talk together, when they entrust the talking and the negotiation just to the governments that have failed time and time again. Because governments, like Ronnie would tell you, all they want to do is win elections. So they will do anything to win. But the people in Gaza, the people in Sderot and the southern Negev, all they want to do is to live. And you would think there should be like a meeting point there, but a lot of time it doesn't seem. So I just feel like a story like this that shows the human toil, the human aspect of the conflict, maybe it will generate some conversation and some change.
Thank you, Ose. For Ahmed, we so often see in films and in the news media depictions of violence in Gaza and other Palestinian areas and against Palestinians. How do you feel about having violence against Palestinians shown in films and on TV, and the fact that we never get to see Gazan life to balance that out? What does hopeful life in Gaza look like, and how do you feel about how Palestinians are shown to the rest of the world?
نساعدك. فالسؤال هو أحمد، يعني كتير مرات الفلسطينية، التصوير اللي بيطلع لبرا، الصورة اللي بتطلع لبرا عن الفلسطينية وخصوصا بغزة هي عن كل الحروبات وقتل والعنف اللي بيصير. إيش وجهة نظرك؟ كيف أنت بتشوف لما بتطلع هاي الصورة لبرا للخارج؟ وكتير مرات يعني بنشوف إيش هي الحياة اليومية في غزة، يعني للفلسطينيين بغزة، كيف الحياة الثقافية اليومية، وكيف إيش وجهة نظرك هاي الحياة للمستقبل لو إحنا بنشوف هاي الصورة كمجتمع اللي عايش في سلام، كيف بكون منظره يعني؟ أو إيش هي الصورة اللي أنت حابب توصلها للعالم؟
الصورة اللي حابب أوصلها للعالم، إحنا بغزة حياتنا مش بس هيك، مش حروب ودمار يعني في عنا ثقافة، في عنا حياة، في عنا روح، في كل شيء، كل مقومات الحياة النفسية والروحية موجودة، ولكن ينقصنا المقومات الأساسية. يعني إحنا عندنا بسبب الحصار الإسرائيلي، بسبب حصار السلطة، بسبب المناكفات مع حماس المسيطرة بفعل الانقلاب على الحكم في غزة، عندنا كثير مقومات الحياه ناقصه يعني بدون الحروب. عندنا مثلا الادويه قليله او شحيحه. عندنا مصادر المياه بعد الانسحاب الاسرائيلي من قطاع غزه تقريبا مسيطر عليها بشكل كلي، يعني مسروقه. يعني عندنا المياه اللي في غزه اغلبها غير صالحه، فبنضطر عندنا محطات تحليه للمياه عشان ايش؟ عشان نشرب مياه نظيفه. على صعيد الكهرباء بعد العمليه اللي قامت فيها حركه حماس وخطفت اسرت قلعات شليط، تم تدمير محطه الكهرباء، وكل العالم شاف كيف دمرت محطه الكهرباء. اليوم احنا يعني انا لو بدي اصور لك كيف انا الاناره عندي اللي انت شايفني فيها تقدر تشوف، هذه اناره على البطاريه 12 فولت. يعني احنا بنضطر نشحن بطاريات عشان نضوي. يعني احنا حاليا الكهرباء بتجينا قديش؟ في احسن الظروف 8 ساعات، وصل 8 ساعات قطع. على
بس أوصل
تفضل.
لهون للجمهور.
تفضل.
So Ahmed was saying that there's obviously all sorts of Palestinian communal life in Gaza. There's the cultural life, there's entertainment, there's you know, all sorts of arts and things that people do. But the thing that stands out most that he'd want the world to know is that they are living off of they're also needing the basics, and the basic necessities aren't available for them. And so he's gone on to describe that. He describes how since the hostage capture of Gilad Shalit by Hamas, which was in 2004, correct? امتى كان؟ 2004
2006.
In 2006, the electric company that was in Gaza was destroyed, and so today he's shown us the ceiling in the room that he's sitting in. Those lights that he showed us are operating off of 12-volt batteries that they charge and recharge. And so, in the best case scenario, they can get up to 8 hours of electricity per day where the electricity is on, and then 8 hours of off. So, and that's how it kind of alternates. In terms of the water, there's practically no drinkable water that is in Gaza. Over 95% of the water that's there is not clean enough for drinking, and so there's purifying centers that they have to go to get the water. And so all the medicines, the medications, because of the siege on Gaza are really rare, and only the bare necessities are available. And so all these make life much more challenging, and it's hard not to think about the politics, even though obviously people tend to go on and they have the cultural and the musical and do life on the daily. But كنت بدك تكمل أحمد؟
وبالنسبه للقطاع الصحي، يعني طبعا الكل بيعرف انه منهار جدا في قطاع غزه. ابسط العمليات الجراحيه بنضطر نحولها الى المستشفيات في الضفه الغربيه او في الجانب الاسرائيلي او حتى في مصر. على الصعيد التعليمي المنظومه التعليميه انهارت بسبب الخلاف بين حماس والسلطه. اغلب المعلمين القدامى قعدوا في بيوتهم، مما اضطرت لحماس انها توظف مدرسين غير اكفاء، طبعا انهم لسه ما خذوش تجربه وفي مقتبل العمر، فمنظومه التعليم شبه انهارت. ناهيك عن البطاله اللي صارت بعد الحروب، القطاع الاسكان كيف تدمر. يعني احنا مقارنه بالدخل اللي بدخل علينا في غزه على دخل العامل، تيجي تشوف كيف بيتاجر بيت عشان يعيش فيه او يتملك البيت، هذا طبعا شيء كبير كثير. موضوع السفر طبعا مهم جدا. يعني السيدة رونيا يعني ساعدتنا كثير في المواضيع هذه، ولكن بصعوبة جدا. يعني بتقعد بالسنة وبالسنتين وبالثلاث عشان تحاول تقدر تطلع من إيرس. طبعا صعبة جدا جدا، توصل لمستحيلة. ومصر إذا ما معك فلوس تدفع للنظام المصري يعني في النهاية تطلعش. يعني عملية السفر للشباب بتكلف من الجانب المصري تقريبا ما يقارب ال 3000 او 4000 دولار زي عمولة عشان تتفحل المعبر، رشوة باختصار يعني.
And so he goes on to give other examples in terms of education. A lot of, because of the disagreement between Fatah and Hamas, the education system is in really bad shape. A lot of the teachers, the qualified teachers, tend to leave, have gone to the West Bank. There isn't new training and funding that comes to the education system. Um, the healthcare system is not in anywhere in adequate condition. I mean, in terms of any surgery that is needed, or any case that is more than kind of that needs any extra attention is transferred to the West Bank, or Israel in kind of in extreme cases. Um, and the biggest issue and challenge they face is obviously mobility. And so a lot of for young people travel. And he said that Roni has helped a lot with on this issue, which is near impossible for someone to leave. And Ahmed, I think, Roni, you were able to help him, but it was very, very difficult. Took a lot of coordination, and it's very rare that happens. On the Egypt, that's through the Israeli side, and then on the Egyptian side, he says, as young people try to leave, it's very costly. There's basically what he describes as a bribe that has to be paid, or what's officially called commission fees to the Egyptian authorities, that are up to $3,000 to $4,000 to make it out of the Gaza Strip. And so life just becomes almost impossible in every aspect of life, of daily life. So,
إعلاميا طبعا خلينا نحكي على الإعلام. الإعلام بتطلع على المشاكل أو بتصير بخطوط متوازية. الإعلام التابع للسلطة والحركة فتح بتطلع من منظور إنه طلع حماس كيف عملت فيك وكيف أخذتكم للجانب للنفق المظلم. بتطلع على الإعلام التابع لحركة حماس بيقول لك السلطة فرضت حصار وقطعت وعملت مساعدة إسرائيل. تطلع على الإعلام اللي هو الداعي الإسرائيلية تلاقيها بتصور لك مشهد قصف صاروخ، مع يعني في بعض الصواريخ توصلش الجانب الإسرائيلي، ولكن مظاهر الخوف بيجي بيقول لك إحنا بندمر في غزة البنية التحتية لحماس. فالإعلام حتى غير منصف، يعني كله مسيس. فأنا كمواطن فلسطيني أو كمواطن غزي ليش أدفع الثمن هذا؟ ليش أدفع الثمن صراعات على بقعة أرض يعني كلها أبعادها كم كيلومتر لا تساوي؟ فبعتقد الإعلام حتى كان جزء من المشكلة، لأنه أصلا مسيس، مش إعلام مستقل بتطلع لنا بمنظور إن إحنا ضحايا. يعني أنا بعتقد من وجهة نظري إنه إحنا في قطاع غزة الناس العادية ضحايا هالمعركة اللي قاعد بتصير ما بين ثلاثي بتصارعوا على قطاع غزة وعلى ثروات قطاع غزة. يديك العافية.
And just back to the image that's portrayed to the outside world. I mean, he says the biggest problem is that none of the media outlets are objective and free of blame, because whether if you're looking, for example, at a media outlet coming out of that's attributed to the Fatah government, and so they'll oftentimes portray Gaza as, oh, look at what Hamas did. Because of what they did, now the Gaza is in such dire conditions. If you're looking at TV or media outlets that are affiliated with Hamas, then they're going to say, because of what Fatah did and what Israel did together, they've put Gaza under siege. And on the Israeli side, it's also instilling fear in Israelis and focusing on the rocket attacks and some of these rockets, he says, even though they're very kind of very basic but they tend to draw a bigger picture that there's just evil all over the strip that are trying to destroy Israel, and so to kind of justify the siege that's going on. And so he says, all these the media isn't helping, and all these parties are basically fighting over this strip of land. And the people that are paying the highest price for it are the Palestinians of Gaza, the Gazans themselves, that are ultimately the biggest victims of all of this.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. I really appreciate hearing more about the struggles of daily life and the very real experiences of violence that occur on a day-to-day basis beyond rocket fire. Roni, that brings to mind for me a question I had wanted to ask you about. When we talk about violence, we often think about it in its physical forms, or as Ahmed just described, a lack of electricity. But there's a part in the film where you talk about how heartbreaking it is that for your children, the situation they live in has caused them to think and act in ways that go against their nature. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more before I open it up to audience questions about how living as occupiers or in Israel with the occupation of Palestine going on and the conflict, how that's a form of violence against them and has harmed them as well in a different way from how Gazans are harmed.
I hope I understood your question well. Look, I believe that we have got to start starting a dialogue. But we can't have a true, real dialogue if we're not on an equal level. And as long as we are the occupiers and the others are the occupied, we are immediately on different levels. So we can't sit up here and say, we want the Hamas, or we want, no one mentioned the Hamas, sorry, but we want the Palestinian Authority to come and to a dialogue. And they're not saying they will, because they won't, as long as they're not on our same level, because we can't talk in that way. So I feel myself that with all the risks involved, and I'm not being that naive by saying that there's no risk involved, but the only way to start is to stop this occupation and to open up the siege and let people feel that they are free to move, free to go wherever they want, not necessarily leave Gaza, but to leave for a while, not escape from Gaza, but just to leave, to see another way of living, and to come back and bring that to their own people. But this can only be done if we're again talking on the same surface. And so I feel that this is the first step. We can't ask anyone to come and talk to us or invite people to a dialogue until we open that space up. And then when people tell me this, so I know we don't want to, you might want to take the risk, I won't. I said, look, I had risk today. When was it? I think last week or 10 days ago that I was talking to Ose on Zoom with some people from the States, and I had got a message on my phone, and I said, look, I might have to leave you any moment because it looks as if things are heating up. Luckily, it ended by one explosion somewhere, and it stopped at that. But so I'm at risk today. But I feel that if we open this up and give them a little space to breathe, then we'll be able to move forward, and it will be a positive risk. Today, it's a negative risk. Did I answer your question? I hope I did.
Yes, thank you, Roni. I'd like to open it up to audience questions now. So a reminder, if you've got something you'd like to ask either Ahmed, Ose, or Roni, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll invite you to unmute. So Connor Anderson, if you are on and you'd like to ask your question live, I'd invite you to unmute now.
Yeah, hi guys. Yeah, I guess my question was kind of already answered a little bit, but maybe we can touch on it a little bit more. just knowing that the conditions in Gaza are not great, is there a way for Palestinians to leave in safe passage if they wanted, or do they even want to leave? And if not, why don't they want to leave? Is it because they want to go back to their true homeland and stay there and fight for that? So I'm just curious of the Palestinian perspective there.
All right, thanks for your question, Connor. Good to see you on. أحمد، السؤال هو لإلك عن الفلسطينية وجهة نظرهم للطلوع من غزة. يعني الأغلبية هل حابين يطلعوا يسافروا يهاجروا من قطاع غزة، أو كيف يعني كيف المرحلة، كيف الواحد بيطلع من غزة اليوم؟ أنت فسرت وحكيت كيف إنه كتير صعب، بس هل في طريقة للناس تطلع؟ هل حابين الناس تطلع، ولا إنه متمسكين بإنه لازم يضلهم ولازم يرجعوا مثلا اللاجئين يرجعوا بيوتهم في ال48؟ ولا كيف وجهة نظر الأغلبية في غزة بهذا الموضوع؟
طبعا وجهة النظر بهذا الموضوع تنقسم لجزئين. جزء الشباب، يعني اللي أعمارهم خلينا نقول ما بين 25 أو 24 ل 35، هاي الشباب كلها فكرها الوحيد كيف تطلع من غزة وكيف ما ترجعش. يعني أنا بقول لك لو في غزة الأمور المادية جيدة للشباب لنسبة كبيرة جدا هاجرت وطلعت. كان ما يعني انا قلت لك ان الامر مكلف جدا، مش اي واحد بيقدر يروح يعمل فيزا ويدفع لمصر، بعدين يدفع تذكره طيران، بعدين بيعمل في اوروبا لجوء، يعني بيدفع مصاري لمحامي ولقضاء لحد يقدر يقول والله لحد انه ياخذ الاقامه عشان يقنع المحكمه انه هذا. لكن في المقابل بتروح للناس اللي برا غزه من زمان، يعني ما عاصروش عهد حماس او ما عاصروش الانقسام ما بين فتح وحماس في غزه، بتيجي بتحكي معهم من برا. يعني لنا اقرباء واصدقاء بقول لك انا بتمنى اليوم اللي ارجع فيه على غزه، بتمنى اليوم اللي طب يا عم الوضع في غزه سيء، بقول لك مش مشكله ولا الغربه. تيجي بتحكي للجيل الكبير بقول لك لا، ايش ما كانت غزه بمشاكلها بهذا مصيرها تتحسن. يعني انا ما بسيبش بلدي لو كيف ما كان. فبعتقد انه يعني زي ما قلت لك بنقدر نقسمه لقسمين. الشباب لو معهم لطلعوا زمان يعني صراحه يعني.
So he answers the question by saying basically this is the Palestinian perspective really gets divided into a couple groups of people. The first and the largest group of people are the young people, let's say between that are in their 20s up to the age of 35. He would say that if they had the means, basically would have left in huge numbers. But because it's so expensive, as he explained earlier, that it would take several $1,000s to pay just on the Egyptian border, and then also you'd have to pay for visa applications and then for life in Europe or elsewhere. And so the costs of it are the biggest barrier. Otherwise, young people especially would be leaving in very large numbers and wouldn't think twice, just because there's they don't see a future in the strip. Um, and then there are others who say, older generation tends to say that whatever happens here, at least this is kind of the devil I know rather than the one I don't, because they hear of stories where people have left. They might have family members that have left that live abroad, and that living in the diaspora is also not easy. And a lot of people do want to come back and visit and miss home. And so they would oftentimes, as when they're speaking to these relatives, they would say, I'd give anything to come back just for a visit. And although the people that live there will tell them things are really difficult. Why would you want to come here? And they say, no, I just want to come back even for a day. And so those are kind of that's the division. But for the largest part, and as we said earlier, the majority of Gazans are under the age of 25, and so that's the biggest proportion that would want to leave, but it's very difficult. Other than the bureaucracy and other than the logistical challenges, it's also very costly.
Thank you, Ahmed, and thank you, Jack. Ola, if you'd like to ask your question.
I have a few questions, but I'll start with the basic question that can be answered by both Ronnie and Ahmed. In the perfect world, how can one make life in Gaza beautiful for everyone to want to stay? What can both sides do to make that dream become a reality?
Can I answer first with how I feel anyway on this side? Gaza can be beautiful. I'm sure it can. When people came to live, when in the early 50s here in Israel, it wasn't as beautiful as it is today. And I believe that Gaza can be just as beautiful, but they've got to be given a chance. And they can only do that if they're free to move and learn and see. I want them to have a beautiful Gaza right on my doorstep, because then I think we can be friends and we can connect and we can move forward. And maybe more people will prefer to stay and not to leave. Because from the years, I spent 5 years in Egypt, and those years I met many Palestinians who never felt completely at home in Egypt. So my Israeli friends might say to me, oh, if they don't care about their Palestinian brethren, why should we? And I say, because they're my neighbors. And I won't tell anyone else how to behave or how to act. First of all, I'll look into myself and I'll see how I've got to behave and how I've got to act in order to have a better future for us both. Because I think it completely depends on us both. And I really do, I honestly and truly do believe that it's possible, especially after meeting people like Ahmed and the others I've met in Gaza. I know they can make Gaza great. They can, I'm sure they can. But they can't be done as long as they're closed in the way they are at the moment. They need an opening by air, by sea, by land. And I'm sure Gaza, I know from stories that Gaza used to be very beautiful. Well, let's make it beautiful again. And I think people like Ahmed can do that and want to do that. How far do you agree with me, Ahmed?
Well, I know of someone that makes places great again, but probably we won't want him to go to Gaza. So. Ahmed.
Can I just want to make the question a little bit longer? I know it can be done beautifully, but how are we going to get them to get that freedom so that they can be able to move? That's the next part of the question.
Is that for Ahmed? So how?
For both.
Again, sorry. So what's the question for Ahmed?
The first part is, if life could be perfect, how can Gaza become beautiful again? Mm-hmm. And for everybody to get that freedom, what needs to be done for it to open up?
Right.
you know, what are the actual steps needed for people to breathe in Gaza?
مهم.
And how can that happen?
أحمد، فالسؤال هو نفس السؤال سأله روني ونسألك إياه، إنه يعني بأحسن الأحوال بالحال المثالي تعال نحكي كيف بتكون غزة، يعني كيف بكون الحياة في غزة، وبعد ما تجاوب هذا السؤال كيف نوصل لهذا الحال، يعني إيش هم الخطوات المركزية اللي لازم تصير عشان نوصل لهذا الحال.
غزة طبعا كانت يعني من أجمل المدن يعني صراحة الفلسطينية، يعني كانت قبلة لكثير من الناس تيجي تزورها، إن كانت من فلسطين أو برا فلسطين. يعني بتذكر وأنا عمري قبل ما تصير المشاكل هاي، كانوا الفلسطينيين من 48 كانوا يوم السبت يكونوا مملين غزة من كثر ما هي حلوة، يعني بحرها أماكنها. في بداية عهد السلطة كانت غزة تعتبر المركز أو ثقل السلطة، زي ما هي رام الله اليوم. يعني الكل بتغنى في رام الله، كانت غزة في عهد ياسر عرفات كانت هي الثقل، هي المركزية. فبعتقد غزة انه لو جتها الفرصة انه صراحة بتكون عنوان، يعني عنوان للاقتصاد، عنوان للازدهار، عنوان للجمال. فيها بحر، فيها واجهة، يعني واجهة بحرية راح تكون مميزة. يعني اليوم احنا خلينا لو طلعنا على الداخل، تطلع على على يافا واجهة، لانه عندها واجهة بحرية. احنا برضو عندنا في غزة واجهة لا تقل عن يافا. تمام. بالنسبة للخطوات، اولا انا من وجهة نظري رغم ان انا معارض وبشدة لسياسة حماس، ولكن اليوم لو نظرنا لحماس بدأت تنسلخ من جلدها. بدأت اليوم حماس تحكي مع الجانب الإسرائيلي حتى ولو عبر وسيط. اليوم لنا سنين كنا بنشوف كيف التفاهمات اللي بتتم من خلال قطر، من خلال مصر، وبتنجح في النهاية. بتم ادخال اموال لحماس. يعني انت يعني تيجي تحكي على الجانب الاسرائيلي، انت بتعاقبني انا كفلسطيني وفي النهايه بتدخل اموال لحماس. يعني طب كيف بدي افهمها يعني؟ برضه زي ما انت مدي فرصه لتثبيت حكم حماس عشان مصالحك السياسيه، يعني اللي هو في ظل تثبيت الانقسام الفلسطيني، برضه اديني فرصه انا كمواطن. وانا قلت لك كمان خلينا نكون واقعيين، انه حماس اليوم بدات تنسلخ من جلدها، اليوم بدات تتقبل انه تسمع من الجانب الثاني. الشغله الثانيه، احنا اليوم في خضم الانتخابات، يعني اهم شيء اليوم قاعدين بنشتغل عليه في غزه انه احنا كيف بدنا ندفع عجله الانتخابات، وانه تتم هذه ونطلع بافضل نتائج. يعني انا على الصعيد الشخصي حكيت لك قبل هيك انا معارض لحماس، ولكن خليني اقول لك بصريح العباره، اليوم انا برضه بدي ادعم فتح رغم انه فتح عنده سلبيات كثير 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 كثير، يعني لا تعد. انا قلت لك يعني في بدايه اللقاء انه فتح ساهمت في المشاكل اللي في غزه عبر سلطتها. ولكن اليوم لو رجعنا للتاريخ شويه، تقدر تقول انه الاجرأ على اتخاذ خطوه باتجاه السلام لاعاده غزه الى الحياه حركه فتح. فبالتالي اليوم كخطوه ثانيه انه اذا بدناش نعطي الفرصه لحماس، خلينا نقول والله نشتغل على الانتخابات ونجيش الناس لتصوت للخصم. لانه خلينا واقعيين، المستقل لن يستطيع انه يطلع فينا حتى لو كان مؤمن بافكار السلام، لن يستطيع. احنا الشعب الفلسطيني شعب مسيس. فبالتالي اعتقد انه الانتخابات فرصه، اعطاء الفرصه لحماس كونها صارت جزء من المعادله الفلسطينيه وجزء من المعادله الدوليه. اليوم بتحكي انت في سياسات دوليه بتحكي فيها، برضه شيء منيح. والفتح طرق الحديث والحوار، يعني احنا عندنا في النظام الفلسطيني بالذات في غزه، من المحرم علي ان انا احكي مع حد في الجانب الاسرائيلي، بعتبر ان انا على تواصل مع جهات معاديه للشعب الفلسطيني واعاقب عليه، وتعاقبت قبل هيك. ولكن انا مصر. ولكن انا من وجهه نظري انه حتى البرلمان اللي بده يجي يفتح افق للتواصل عشان احنا نقدر نوصل نبلور افكار بناءه بين الطرفين. شكرا.
So Ahmed goes on to describe kind of Gaza at its height, and Gaza the way it was, and not even at its height, but through even if you go back in the 90s, um, when Yasser Arafat came back and made it he says Gaza was one of the main Palestinian cities with its seafront views, and it can be one of the most beautiful Palestinian cities just because of its port, because of the sea. It could be a source for commerce, for culture, just like historically Jaffa was, and Haifa, and all the port cities. And so there's a lot of potential for Gaza, and it was not so long ago, a generation or two ago, a place where people would come to visit when, whether from Arab countries or elsewhere, come to visit Palestine or Palestinian cities. Gaza would always be a top choice, and so that can be done. And the steps he describes is, basically, he puts a lot of hope in the upcoming Palestinian elections. Um, he says that the Palestinian elections are a step towards kind of dissolving the siege, or taking a step back from the siege. Um, although he doesn't like the Fatah party, he himself would vote for the Fatah party, um, because they have left kind of an open a channel with the Israelis for conversation and dialogue. At the same time, he points the finger at Israel and says that right now and just recently there has been conversations with between the Israeli government and the Hamas government. There have been funds that came in through Qatar, through Hamas, and so, as a Palestinian living in the Gaza Strip, he looks at this and says, Israel points the finger at all of us, and there's collective punishment when something goes wrong, and we all pay the heavy toll. Yet when there are talks between the two leaderships, there's funding going straight to the Hamas government. And so how are we supposed to look at this, as Gazans, as Palestinians? How are we supposed to understand this? And so there is a way. There are talks when necessary, when it meets political interests. Um, and so he doesn't view that as a big of a hurdle as the kind of the political figures make it out to be. um, but I guess a way around it he views is the upcoming Palestinian elections, that he's pushing for people to come out to vote and to make sure that it happens, because a lot of people are thinking that it might not because of the pandemic, because it might be postponed. And so he really hopes that it's not postponed. He really hopes that it does happen, and that it's a way for, first of all, to remedy the division that's happened in Palestinian politics, and as a way forward in negotiations with Israel in order to lift the siege on Gaza.
Thank you so much, Ahmed and Jack. That's some really helpful analysis. Yasmin, I think you had a question that related to the elections as well. Did that answer what you were wondering, or would you still like to chime in and ask?
If possible, I can ask it. Yeah, it's kind of on a dream. I know the election also in Israel is quite not so good direction for the about the deal with the Palestinian in Israel. But what kind of government? It's both sides, in the Israel side and in the Palestinian side. What kind of government, if established, probably something effect to building a peace? What do you think about what kind of government you dream about it? Also, Ahmad and Ronnie, I wanted asking for the boss of the government kind of form you dream about it.
I think it was on a TENOS webinar that I heard Martin Indyk, who used to be American ambassador here in Israel, say that as long as Mohammed Abbas and Mahmoud Abbas, I'm sorry, and and then Bibi Netanyahu in leadership, in government, there's not likely to be any way to move forward. We do need a government that realizes that 20% of the population in Israel are Arabic, Palestinian, and we're surrounded by Palestinians. We're surrounded and realize that there are people that have a history and a link, both historically and theologically, to this land, just like us. Now, I'm not for 1 minute saying that I don't feel that this is my land. I do feel that this is my land, and this is where I can be with and where I can live. But I need a government that realizes that there is another people with exactly the same right. Okay, it's a small piece of land, but we can come to terms and learn how to live side by side. Different ways, different ideas. There are many, but first of all, we have got to want to realize this and understand that there is no other way, because we are both here to stay. Now, there are people, I've spoken to people in government, in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament, in the Knesset, and to people in different parties who do realize this. But they are also very much afraid that our existence depends on their understanding as well, that we are here to stay. And this is the conflict, the mistrust between the two people that is completely taking over, and it's devastating for us both. We can go on blaming one another for the situation, and we'll both be justified in whatever we say. I can be justified for being so afraid because I can hear the bombs and the explosions and the tunnels I'm so afraid of. And same thing, they can just as well be as mistrusted as me. So we've got to find these people, and I believe they're there. We've just got to find them, give them the power, and lift them up so that they can do something. And I honestly, really, I'm sure it's going to happen. I'm just so sorry for all these years that are going by before it does.
Amen to that. Yeah. أحمد، السؤال هو يعني أي منظمة أو أي قدوة سياسية كنت بتحب تشوف، يعني مش بالضرورة تحكي عن اسم، بس إيش الأشياء اللي يعني أي فكر يكون عندها
الجانب الفلسطيني؟
بجانب الفلسطيني، نعم.
Possible, what kind of a government, if Palestinian Israeli side also, what kind of a government can be in Israeli side you dream about or you hope about, both of also Palestinian side and Israeli side.
وكمان على الجانب الإسرائيلي يعني.
لك بالنسبة للحكومة في الجانب الإسرائيلي، يعني أنا بتمنى تكون يعني حكومة أولا مش يمينية، حكومة اللي تفوز في الانتخابات الإسرائيلية ما تنتهج يعني ما تكونش عنصرية، ما تكونش قومية، ما تكونش تنتج طبقية. يعني خلينا واقعيين، حكومة نتنياهو بتتعامل، أو الحكومة الإسرائيلية بتتعامل مع الفلسطيني حتى اللي مع الهوية الزرقاء الإسرائيلية كمواطن درجة ثانية. بدنا حكومة إسرائيلية تمد جسور الثقة إلنا كفلسطينيين في غزة وفي الضفة الغربية، بدل ما قاعدة بتعمل حواجز وبتعمل جدران وإلى آخره، عشان أنا أقدر أقنع طفلي إنه والله في المستقبل ممكن أتعايش مع الشعب الموجود بحكومته الموجودة. لكن في وجود هذه الحواجز والهاجس الأمني اللي قاعدة تبنيه الحكومة الإسرائيلية بقيادة نتنياهو، كيف أنا بدي أقدر أقنع جيل كامل إنه ممكن أنا أقدر أتعايش أو ممكن أقدر أقنعه بالسلام؟ خلينا واقعيين يعني. هذا بالنسبه للجانب الاسرائيلي، لازم تكون حكومه مش يمينيه ومش عنصريه، على الاقل تحترم الفلسطيني اللي عايش عندها، يعني اللي هو من ضمن اولوياتها. بالنسبه للحكومه الفلسطينيه انا قلت لك انا واضح، يعني في المرحله الحاليه انا مش ملاقي اكفأ من فتح او الاقوى لانها تاخذ على عاتقها توقع اتفاقيه سلام، ولا فصيل فلسطيني يجرؤ انه يروح باتجاه انه يوقع اتفاقيه سلام كما عملت فتح في اوسلو. اوسلو بكل مساوئها كانت بوابه لحلم الدوله، صح؟ فانا يعني كمواطن فلسطيني وبأخفيش عليك بأشتغل على الارض من اجل انجاح قائمه تؤمن بالشراكه السياسيه وباقامه دولتين، مش انه والله بحكومه قائمه على انه بس والله بدي ابيع الناس وهم انا بدي اخذ فلسطين من البحر للنهر وبدي اضل بصراع مع الجانب الاسرائيلي. طب وين؟ طب لايمتى؟ طب ما انت قاعد قيادتك في تركيا وهذا قيادته في ايران وهذا قيادته هان، وانا كابن فلسطين انا اللي بدفع الثمن. لا، انا بدي حكومه تؤمن بالشرعيه الدوليه، الموافقه على حدود 67، تكون لي دوله اعيش فيها ابنيها، اعيش فيها حياه كريمه، أأمن مستقبل أولادي، أقدر يعني مثلا أنت هيك عربي فلسطيني أقدر أجي أزورك، مش إنه والله بسبب العنصرية والله ما بقدر أجي، اللي صديق مثلا في بيت لحم أو في هان ما أقدرش أجي أزوره. كيف أنا هاي الحكومة اللي أنا بطمح أنها تكون موجودة في فلسطين؟
هقرب احنا بيافا اقل من ساعه بيناتنا.
قريب قريب بالضبط.
100%. 100%. So Ahmed, what Ahmed said about the Israeli leadership is he hopes to see a leadership that's first of all not racist and not right wing as the current Israeli leadership has been under Netanyahu. Um, and one example he said is a leadership in a government that treats its own Palestinian citizens with dignity and rights, just as a, if anything else, but as a trust building measure, where he, his work is trying to convince a whole generation around him that there are partners on the other side. This is a government that we should be speaking to. And how can he do that when this government has been tightening the siege, building larger and higher walls? And in addition to that, also treating the Palestinian citizens of Israel, those that have citizenship, as second-class citizens. So how is he supposed to convince people around him of that these are partners for peace? On the Palestinian side, although he says Fatah has a lot of missteps and a lot of failures, he at the very least, what he views in the Fatah government, which he said earlier, he supports in this next election round, is because it is a party that has signed on to recognition of 67 borders, is working towards the two-state solution, as opposed to Hamas, which he says is kind of selling its people these unrealistic dreams of a one state from the river to the sea, and it's basically just giving them a reality that's not achievable, but at the same time all their leadership is abroad and not paying the price. They are paying the price for the consequences of that. And so even though Fatah is also not the ideal government, it at least meets some initial basic standards he has, that he and that's why he supports the Fatah government. I hope that answers your question, Yasmin.
Thank you so much, both. Oh, go ahead, Roni, if there's something else you'd like to add.
Can I add just one word, please? I was just wanted to say that we're now today, we are having elections this day. And I've never been so unsure of what I should actually do. And I had the Arab Party, one of the Arab parties in Israel, turn to me because knowing my views, I suppose, and they asked me to vote for them. And I said to them, to be honest, I want you part of our community. I want you to be in the Israeli parties, part of the Israeli parties, not to be something distinguished. If I want to believe that we are all equal, then I want you as part of us. I want us to make the decisions together. And I think that will give you much more power as well. And if we manage to build such a community, then we are likely to be able to understand our friends on the other side, on the Palestinian side as well.
Thank you so much, Roni and Ahmed, for some insight into what is a very complicated topic. For those on the call, we will be having a webinar soon unpacking the Palestinian and Israeli elections. We don't have a date quite yet, but be on the lookout so that we can all keep making sense of this together. Our time together is rapidly running out, but I do have one more question for Ose, which is, how can the people on this call bring the film to their communities and help spread it further?
Sorry. Oh, well, thanks. I just saw a question there from Ola. I think the film is screening in America and Canada right now in virtual cinema. If I can get Ola's email address or anybody's email address, I can tell you where to go. It's called darkroom.net. I think David or somebody has the link, so maybe they can put it on there. Yeah. So it's in the chat. It's in the chat window where you can go. And if you want, you can get in touch with me at my email address and we can talk more. Oh, okay. I see Ola's email. Because one of the things we're trying to do really is, like we were saying before the film, before we started the discussion, is we want to be able to like get this to as many people as possible. We want to, because we're a very small film, so we don't have budget of big films. We're trying to also get some kind of coverage, maybe in the media, in communities. So if anybody has links or stuff for us, let me know. My email address, David has my email address. And yeah, and we're also not doing too well in outreaching to the Arab community. It's one other place that I think we'd like to go, because if we can't do that, the film itself is not successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ose. I hope that you all will bring this film back to your communities and that you can continue to discuss. And as David just said, we'll put Ose's email address in the follow-up email if you'd like to get in touch with him directly. That is our time for today. Thank you so much to Roni, Ahmed, and Ose for joining us today, and to Roni and Ahmed for your ongoing peace-building work in Gaza and in southern Israel. We're so grateful for all that you do, and we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. For those of you who are interested, our next event is next Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. It's called Lent in America, in partnership with Coracle and the Repentance Project, where we'll investigate Lent, the principles and practices of peacemaking and racial injustice. David just put a link to that in the chat as well. So thank you so much to our distinguished and wonderful panelists, and to all of you for coming and listening to hear more about how we can become more engaged peacemakers in Israel and Palestine. We hope to see you on another event soon. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.